So I'm happy to see you all here. I hope you had a nice evening last night. Personally, I thought it was fantastic. I've seen the zoo before, of course, but it was really fantastic venue, I believe. So for today, let me just remind you about the safety, how we would evacuate this room if there is an alarm. All these doors are emergency exits, and there are staircases in the corners of the hotel, as well as one in the middle. Make your way downstairs, out through the front doors, and we meet on the big square, guided by the staff of the hotel, of course. So today we have a similar setup as yesterday. We'll have 4 different sessions. We'll start with the energy availability. Then we talk about what's happening in steel-using sectors. We have a session on chain of custody. And last but not least, we'll gather the moderators from the different sessions on stage to talk a little bit about and reflect on the discussions over these last 2 days. And then, of course, you are also all welcome to give your comments and feedbacks and so on that. Don't forget to use the app to contact each other. I believe also presentations are being uploaded to our websites as we go through the presentations during the day. So you should be able to find them there, possibly also with some pictures already from yesterday or some photos. So to start, let me introduce my colleague, Rizwan. Let's see, he's there. Dr. Rizwan Janjua is Head of Technology at Worldsteel, and he's responsible for leading our activities in the field of technology, energy efficiency, and benchmarking systems. So Rizwan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Åsa. So good morning. I do not think it's needed that I will take quite a long bit of time before I jump on my panelists and then hand over the floor to them. But to begin with, I would like to just give you a bit of a snapshot about where we are in terms of our energy requirement for the steel industry. I think it is important when we talk about energy for the steel industry and for the society at large that we start thinking in terms of energy systems. How do the energy systems work? Because we should not be talking about individual components of the energy, but a system as a whole. So let me just walk you through what I mean with this. So how do I get on with this? I have not tried that before. Okay, just bear with me. There goes the head of technology. So we have got 3 presentations lined up. So we are going to address a few questions via these presentations. And I would leave the Q&A at the end, and that we are going to tackle via a panel discussion, which will be quite a bit short. But I'm sure that any outstanding questions that come out of those presentations, we can tackle them in half an hour time. So the session focus is that although there will be quite a dramatic change that we expect, the renewable energies are going to become more and more prevalent. Hydrogen, biofuels, and all sorts of other stuffs. But in order to really understand how that transition is going to take place, we need to address 3 basic questions there. How much energy is needed by the steel industry? And of course, we are not alone in that quest. There are other sectors also which are looking for the same source. So how much is needed by the steel industry? And what is the state of the renewable energy? Are we at pace with that increasing demand? And I am sure that we recognize the fact that there will be simply not enough for everybody, because everybody is looking for renewable energies. So how do we make up for the shortfall? Because we are quickly running out of time and the credits. So how do we make up for the shortfall? Are there any technologies or solutions available which are going to come and save the day? So these are the three questions we are going to address, and I would now call my colleagues on the stage who are going to address these questions. So talking about the energy systems, this is the current paradigm that we dig up resources from the ground, and that means coking coal, oil, gas, and even the nuclear raw material fuel. That has got a history which coincides with the history of the Earth. It means that all that biomaterial went down into the strata, and it was energy coming from the sun, which is stored now over millions and millions of years. We think that, yeah, there are dinosaurs in there, but no animals were harmed in this process, I can tell you that. It is mostly vegetation. But the beauty of that whole process is that when we dig it up, we can store it and use it when it is needed. So it essentially answers two questions. Not only the capture was done millions of years back, and it was stored also indefinitely when we need it. So it addresses those two important questions, capture and storage, and also it facilitates those supply chains. They're all established. When you need coking coal, you buy it, and then you need it, you just get it from your storage, or you just get it from somewhere else. I hope there are no eggs coming my way, but I have put nuclear over there as well. It's not very popular, but I think we should also start keeping that in the back of our head, that at some point it will be important that we start giving it its due importance. So what we have now, the new paradigm, where we talk about capture. But the dotted line, the storage, is a bit hard nut to crack. I would be very happy if somebody just stands up and says that, yeah, this is wrong. We have got the solution. I would leave the stage.
Sorry, but the zinc industry is providing exactly that. This is our market for the future.
I would be happy to talk to you afterwards. So what do we do about storage? Because the wind doesn't blow when you need it, and the sun doesn't shine when you need it. So we need to, whenever we talk about energy systems or solutions, we need to build those two essential components in there, not only capture, but the storage as well. I have got this on the left-hand side, the solar tower there. I took that picture. It is the PS10 and PS20 solar towers somewhere in Seville, in Spain. They are able to capture the sunlight and turn it into heat source and produce electricity for 16 hours uninterrupted. So some of you might question that, yeah, it's not a proven technology or it's not there, but it is at least an attempt. It's a work in progress. They have tried to build two components in there, capture and storage. And the same thing is about pumped hydro. You will come across quite a few projects there. Recently, I came across one small project in India where they are pumping it against the gravity, and whenever you need it, you can run the turbines with that. So this is also the second thing in there. So I will leave you with that thought there. And now I will call my colleagues one by one, and I will pose those questions to them. So my first colleague is Valentin Vogel. He works as steel industry analyst at ARIA. The organization is related to climate change and energy issues, and he's an analyst there. He started his career by doing PhD at the University of Lund, addressing exactly those questions. What does the steel industry need? How does that transition will take place? What does it mean in terms of requirements on the renewable energy? So, Valentin, please, the floor is yours. We look forward to it.
Thank you very much, Rizwan, for the kind introduction. Super nice to be here. I'm glad I have the pleasure to whip you all back into shape after a night of open bar yesterday. I'll do my best to do so. Yeah, as Rizwan introduced, my name is Valentin Vogel. I'm with an organization called ARIA. We provide research and analysis for a wide range of partners, from policy to NGO to also media and journalists, trying to increase the knowledge, in my case, about steel. And before, I did a PhD at Lund University that I titled Steel Beyond Coal. So although this will be in part about renewable energy and the needs for it, this will also be a part about phasing out coal and gas over time and the odds of that or the challenge of that. So my talk will be focused on, or Rizwan asked me to basically set the scene a bit. As we've heard yesterday, that many companies here, the World Steel Association as well, are committed to climate targets. Break that down a bit and go through what that means in terms of emission levels over time and what the implications are for different technologies and then, in the end, energy requirements for the steel sector. So, starting with maybe repackaging some of the things we've heard yesterday. So, Åsa already and others already mentioned that the steel industry is responsible for around 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So this is greenhouse gas, not CO2, but methane, for example, and the coal mines is not included there, as we've heard yesterday. So maybe it's more 9%. And as this is a session about energy, I think it's worth pointing out that about 90% or so of those emissions come from coal consumption today. This, of course, is set to change, both because the steel industry might decarbonize slower or faster than other sectors, but also the steel industry will change its energy consumption, have to change its energy consumption quite drastically, as we've also heard yesterday. We can also say that peak steel emissions, peak greenhouse gas emissions from the steel sector are likely not yet reached. So we've heard that the emission intensity has been going up in the last 10 to 15 years. We've also heard yesterday that steel consumption is growing still. So that, in a simple equation, gives us still rising emissions in the steel sector. And I have another complicated steel emissions trajectory, this time from the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We've seen several of these variations of this yesterday, so I won't go into much detail here. Just to give you an overview of possible trajectories. Personally, I really enjoyed the panel last night and the quite blunt and honest, but also sobering perspectives they provided. So Paul, for example, said we're on track for above 3 degrees. Maybe this is a good moment to say what 3 degrees would mean in terms of which world we live in. We'll completely lose the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets. More than 1 billion people will be facing relocation because of sea level rise. Crazy increase, like 3-4 times increase in terms of time spent in drought, floodings. I don't know if you followed the news, but there's severe floodings in Libya at the moment that climate change will increase the likelihood of, although we can't relate it directly, of course, at least not in advance. So 3 degrees gives us a much more severe chance of these things happening than only 1.5, and 1.5 already puts us at the risk of quite dramatic changes in weather events, sea level rise, drought. So 3 degrees very clearly is not an option, and I'm sure nobody is pursuing 3 degrees. I also think, I'm quite hopeful that we'll not be at 3 degrees in the end. But 1.5, as we've, I think, also heard yesterday, is going to be tough. In this figure, we're already in 2023, so the bend of the curve is much worse. But also 2 degrees is tough, and we're not on track for 2 degrees. So if we break this down a bit, we see that by 2030, compared to 2019, so say today's levels, the global economy will have to go down by 40% in greenhouse gas emissions. That's quite a leap. And we can correlate that to different technologies that we're thinking of applying in the steel industry and different energy carriers we're using. So I'll go into quite a bit of blast furnace CCS and use that as an example to discuss when we should be at which emission levels, and when blast furnace CCS might not be a good idea anymore, but I'll do that later. Here, what I want to say is that there's some key dynamics here in terms of global emission targets that I think we need to consider, and I don't want to go there to break down a carbon budget for the steel sector, because that's always uncertain, right? But there's certain key dynamics that we know and have already addressed in part yesterday. So part of this is that some countries will have to move faster than other countries based on their historic responsibilities, but also based on their capacities to mitigate climate change. Part of this is that some sectors will have to move faster and some will be slower. So the steel industry clearly depends on the energy sector to move first, or at least a bit in advance, so it can draw on renewable energy. But I'd also say the steel industry is not the hardest to abate sector if we look at others. Again, personally, I'm quite happy I don't work in petrochemicals, maybe even cement. That's quite tricky to decarbonize. But I don't really follow when people call steel a hard to abate sector. Maybe 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago. But a lot has changed in these 6-7 years I've been following this space. I know Max, my PhD supervisor, is also here today, and I think 5 years ago we were joking about green steel. I mean, that's never going to be a thing. So now there's amounts of websites and news articles on green steel that we can follow. So a lot is changing, and I think steel can be there with the average pace of the global economy, roughly. The third point here is that within the industry there will be leaders and laggards. So if I'm a, say, Western European steel company that wants to be a leader in the decarbonization space, I need to be way faster than the global average, the trajectory of the global average economy. If I'm an, say, Indian or Indonesian steel producer, but I still want to be a leader in the space, I probably should decarbonize roughly along this light blue line, or try to decarbonize if I want to be a leader in its space. So I think that's how we should understand these targets. And every company, every country, every entity can set their own targets to do so. So back to this figure, it shows steel production and total emissions over time. And we've seen some improvements around the energy crisis in the 70s and 80s. So on global, emission intensity has gone down. There were drastic energy efficiency improvements. We also see that on global average, not much has happened since. And yesterday we heard that emission intensity went up. So I want to offer a metaphor to kind of conclude this first part of the presentation. That is about the scope and scale of this transition that is needed. And yesterday we've heard several people talk about this is the biggest challenge the steel industry is facing or has ever faced. We've heard of turbulence, we've heard of disruption, reputational risk. So this is the pace that roughly, very crudely, China's steel industry expanded between 2000 and 2020. And if we want to go to anywhere close to net zero in 2050, that's exactly the pace that it will be needed in order to meet climate targets. I know, I mean, this is abstract and crude, but that's if we're talking about rolling out hydrogen, we're talking about CCS, we're talking about shifting from one energy carrier to the other, that's the pace that will be needed to do that. So probably there's a lot to learn from how the Chinese did it. It's also a very different problem, building blast furnaces and coal mines to converting existing assets, closing down some, building some new capacity in other places. But that's the timeline, and it's only getting shorter basically because we're running out of carbon budget. So that's the timeline we should also keep in mind when we talk about different technologies that we can do and the lead times it takes to roll them out. Okay, so this was the intro basically. If we look at steel decarbonization as an energy transition, and I very much welcome the systems perspective that Rizwan brought into this, it's quite clear that steel is not the problem. Coal is the problem today. And I'll go into that, why I think that is the case in a moment. But essentially, I believe that coal prevents us from unleashing the innovative capacity of the steel industry. I also think this has two phases. So I'm going to talk about coal lock-in, so the steel industry being in many places locked into using coal, which limits their capacities to decarbonize. Then there is a whole different basic problem and phase of this that is using more electricity, using gas-based CCS in places, using more hydrogen, whatever you guys can come up with, that allows you to, in a local context, decarbonize industry. And this will be disruptive. So that's the third point here. Energy transitions, as we know from other examples, they're not linear events. They're not events where often incumbent firms do something, change, and then they're still in the driver's seat. Energy transitions, if they happen, and quite often they haven't happened, but they're extremely disruptive. They often don't leave those that were leaders before in the driving seat later. And they're also very messy and non-linear. And I think that resonates with what was said yesterday, and that resonates with the quite blunt picture we were presented in the last presentation. If we extrapolate the last 30 years into the future, we'll go to 3 degrees. We won't go into an energy transition, but we have a whole set of other problems. So I think this is the quite honest picture. I don't have the solutions necessarily. Probably few do. But I think this is where we are. So if you go into energy demand in industry currently, we see that 75% or so is coal. There's a bunch of electricity, which again in part comes from coal, in part from other sources. There's a bunch of gas, and that's pretty much it. If we look at the IEA's net zero scenario, which also gives us a 50% chance to meet the 1.5 degree target, then we see that in 2030 already, coal is going down by around 18% in this figure. There's a drastic increase in electricity, and I'd say the IEA is not they're not activists, right? But the IEA is quite optimistic, I think, on the potential for recycling. And with what we heard yesterday evening by Mr. Jeremy Jones about the problems with the recycling system, I think the IEA is quite optimistic in terms of what can be recycled. So in any case here, electricity is going up drastically, which is to some extent part to recycling. If we spin this forward, we can zoom out and say there's a few options here. There's hydrogen, we've talked about this extensively. There's electricity, direct electricity, either in recycling or things like molten oxide electrolysis. There's biomass in some cases. And there's the possibility to stick with fossil fuels and do CCS. These are really the options. Nuclear is in there if we want to talk about it, of course. And on the right side here, it's again the chart by the IEA that spins it forward to 2050. And that's disruption in one picture, I think. So most of the energy from the steel industry will come from electricity, according to the IEA. There's a bunch of CCS on coal and gas. We'll go into that in a second. There's some biomass, and there's overall drastically reduced steel consumption, but not really, drastically reduced energy consumption, sorry, but not really reduced, much reduced steel consumption. So that's the roughly, so that's the IEA's perspective on it. We can have different perspectives, and especially on CCS, I'm really looking forward to the discussions. One more slide before I get into it. So this two-phase understanding I spoke about is partly about, so I see it as, today, most of steel production is based on blast furnaces. And blast furnaces, in order to go really low emissions, need to do several things. Blast furnace CCS needs to be combined with biomass. There's several exhaust pipes that make it tricky. So I come from a perspective of carbon lock-in. Carbon lock-in means that the industry is, or a certain industry is basically locked into a place where they can't really, on their own, decarbonize. What I've heard yesterday, this is very much the case. And it needs policy and partly the transformation of how we do business, how the economy works to get them out of there. I think, so my perspective is often very European, but we're seeing signs of that. The move from cap and trade, emissions trading to more active industrial policy, it's a paradigm shift. It's very new in Europe. The US was way quicker with the IRA, but this is a major shift that has massive implications for how the steel industry can operate. And to me, it became quite clear again yesterday that much of this is not in the steel industry's hands, but the steel industry needs to be quite smart in moving with the trends. And it's also a bit of a gamble. But so these two phases, the steel industry is locked into coal, but once it moves out of coal, there's all these options. There's electricity, there's hydrogen, there's gas CCS. There might be options to import iron from somewhere else. We heard about metallic hubs. So retiring the blast furnace opens up these options. And I'm not saying that every single steel mill will do that. There's a lot of local context to it. Some countries might develop gas or coal-based steel CCS infrastructure, go down the CCS route. Some single companies might do biomass-based steelmaking. There's all the variety. I'm talking about general trends here over the last years and what I see happening going forward. Also, quite clear, power sector decarbonization is the precondition, right? It will be very hard for the steel industry to move out of coal if renewables are not on the horizon. And gas access is very limited in many places. So it's quite a gamble also to build gas infrastructure if electricity is not going to come. So a few words and a few provocative words that I enjoy. So there's a lot of good puns with blast furnaces, and I all invite you to join me. But so the problem I see with blast furnace CCS, and I'm speaking of the perspective of meeting climate targets, right? I'm not speaking of single steel mills and like feasible pathways, but I'm saying what needs to be done if you want to meet climate targets. So the problem is we need several things to fall into place. We need CCS with high capture rates, which in itself is possible. We also need CCS on several exhaust pipes. I mentioned coal mine methane, but we have sinter plants, we have coke ovens, we have lime kilns that all emit CO2 in a steel mill. We need long-term and reliable CO2 storage, also an option, but these things need to all work together, right? We also need bioenergy or some kind of substitution for PCI, pulverized coal injection, basically. We need to get down the coke rate as much as possible, but there is a bottom there that we cannot really move beyond today. So all these things need to fall into place, plus the logic of CCS is quite different to the logic of electrification. Electrification is very expensive today, but it offers, similar to the renewable energy sector, quite a lot of technological learning potential. It can become cheaper over time, whereas CCS is an added cost that needs to be compensated by a carbon price. So it's very different approaches, right? And as, for example, Europe is moving more into industrial policy, this serves the interest of electrification much more than CCS, because CCS requires this carbon pricing attitude. So all this together, plus the issue of coal mine methane, tells me that this is quite risky, because you need to gamble on, say you rely on a blast furnace, or you even build a new blast furnace and you want to go with CCS. It's quite a gamble to rely on 20, 30 years of CCS infrastructure, CCS policy being in place, and all these things working out, right? Only the supply of biomass is quite risky. I think that's the main problem, that CCS on a blast furnace phases, I think is very different for CCS on gas-based steelmaking. Don't think we'll have the time to go into it, but if we go forward, I mean, this is again the IEA, and it tells disruption. So the net zero scenario in green, if we were to decarbonize quickly, coking coal would suffer 80, 90% reduction, and this will be messy. Thermal coal is already meeting a lot of resistance, and this is partly also spilling over into coking coal, because investors don't always know the differences, because there's now organizations that are called Steel Watch, and they say no more coal in steel production in civil society. There's issues with permitting and insurance in the Australian coal mining industry, coking coal mining industry. So there's all these things coming up on the coal side, I think, that motivate this phase out. Finally, I thought maybe I can do something hopeful, but after also last night, I'm not sure I can. I think moving beyond coal, it's going to be hard, but it opens up a lot of possibilities. Gas CCS is definitely a topic. Also, in some places, leaping into renewables and not going for gas is an option. The metallic hubs restructuring conversation is, I think, very promising. But yeah, moving out of coal opens up these pathways that are not open as long as the steel industry stays with coke ovens and met coal, because it's going to be difficult to do those things. Finally, one of my favorite charts shows steelmaking technology transitions over time and how quickly it went. Often, so I said transitions are non-linear, right? Often there's a lot of effort you need to put in to get to a point where even just something happens. But then there can be tipping points, and things can move quite quickly. If you look at the open hearth furnace here, for example, or the electric arc furnace, It has quite some lead time, but then the steel industry is very quickly in rolling out these things. I think that's what the hope is, plus, yeah, hopefully more systemic change in the energy system that the steel industry can benefit from. But yeah, looking forward to the next two speakers basically solving these issues for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentin. I think we have established the fact that the society at large is becoming more and more power hungry, and that hunger is marked by increasing use of electricity. So more and more electrification, and the steel industry is one of those sectors which is going to require large amounts of electricity. So I think that's a good point to hand over the stage to my next two colleagues. So we have Cyril Duchanois. I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. So Cyril works with Total Energies, and he has got over 20 years of experience with the international companies, including the steel industry, ArcelorMittal, Vallourec, and he has had a role within the steel industry as well as several other sectors. So he's vice president in the newly created One B2B Solution division. He will be accompanied by Christian Kolik. He is the global market executive, also with the same organization, Total Energies. So he has also similar experience in the industry, over 20 years. So both of you are going to share the slides between yourself. So please, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Rizwan. So good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank World Steel Association for the invitation, because this year we attend several green steel conferences in Europe, in US, and all the time they were dealing with transformation of the steel, issue with the price of hydrogen, issue with energy, but not so many energy companies were invited to give from our window what we see and what we're going to share today. So thanks for the invitation. Second, I would like also to thank Rizwan for the preparation of today. And thanks also for the great day yesterday we had. So good job, guys. So Total Energies, to start, I don't bother you a lot. Maybe many of you know Total in the past. But we changed our name in May 2021 to Total Energies. What does it mean? A new name, a new logo, new color. Why? Because Total Energy would like to be a global multi-energy supplier. We were in oil and gas, we still are, but we are going to grow in renewables. I just put some numbers here, and I will not comment too much, but for me, two things are important. We are making solid results, we are making profits, and thanks for these profits, we can invest in renewables. You can see last year we are invest $4 billion USD. This year it will be a little bit more, only in renewables, meaning green electricity and new molecules. So this is very important because it will cost a lot. It will cost a lot, and we need some money to develop and to have ambitious goals in order to support the steel industry. And the second numbers is interesting. Last year we landed at 17 gigawatts gross capacity of renewables. I just recall Total, before we were at 0 4 years ago, and we have a very aggressive path. So this is to give you some order of magnitude and to see some logo. You will see more and more with hydrogen, biogas, biomass, etc. What does it mean in our mix evolution? And this is very important, and we share these numbers. Total Energy would like to be, by 2050, net zero. It's crystal clear. But to do that, we have to shift from oil and gas to the renewables, the new electrons, the new molecules by 2050. And we have started. So you can see by 2021, we initiate 9% in terms of renewables and hydrogen, biogas. And we continue this path to 2030 to reach already 20% of this new renewables mix, which is very key for Total Energy. We still remain very solid in gas, because we truly believe also gas, natural gas, it's a good energy for the transition. It's a first step to remove. And it will need a lot of money as well. So this is very important to address. So Total Energy changed the name, Total Energy changed the logo, blah, 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 but what we are doing for customers, because the customers, you guys, are the most important thing for us. So our CEO, Patrick Pouyanné, last year decided to build a brand new division called One B2B Solution to address to 11 segments, which are here, decarbonization solution. So I am happy to lead with Christian the metals segment, meaning steel, but also aluminum. But Total Energy also is developing this decarbonization solution for the mining, the cement, food and beverage, as you can see. So our idea is really to address this type of solution. So for the steel, what can we do? You are the expert. I will not like to comment too much, but I would like to have a little zoom on what will happen with the blast furnace transformation and to give some numbers. You know all that better than me regarding the flat production. So what will happen about the DRI electric arc furnace? So basically, this is what's going to happen. It will cost some money, but we can notice that for the electrification, you guys, you will need a lot of electricity and green electricity. DRI, natural gas, crystal clear, green H2, blue H2, whatever, we'll see. When it will happen, it will be cost efficient. And CCS, because with the DRI, you will have some CO2 to abate in order to reach also your 2050 goals. So this is the landscape, I will say, what will happen in Europe and in some other countries in the world where they are going to shut down the BOF. But I just put in terms of energy. What does it mean? It means a lot. First, it's expensive. As my previous colleagues say, it's expensive. €1 billion for a 2 million ton per annum DRI electric arc furnace. So we have seen in Europe that fundings are coming. In US, they're already there, so we need a lot of money. But 2 million ton of steel, what does it imply in terms of electricity? 2 terawatt-hour per year. 2 terawatt-hour per year. Last weekend, I was preparing the slide, and my son told me 10 years, "Hey, Dad, what are you doing in your job, in fact?" "I'm trying to decarbonize, promote selling electricity." "What? Selling electricity?" "Well, electricity, but 2 what? Oh, nice logo, 2 terawatt-hour. What does it mean? I don't understand electricity." Put a light, but... And I told him 2 terawatt-hour, you know what it is? It's like 2 nuclear plants. And he got it. He said, "Wow, it's big." Yes, it's big. So this is also the order of magnitude. You need this quantity of electricity just for running the EAF. Afterward, let's have a zoom on the gas. Natural gas is quite big. We will have gas everywhere for all the customers. So we have no issue for the gas. Hydrogen. So hydrogen for a 2 million ton per annum DRI, you will need 120,000 tons of H2 per year to run the DRI if you go full speed, 100% H2. Okay, but what does it mean in electricity? In electricity, it means 6 terawatt-hour per year. 6 terawatt-hour to make green hydrogen. So where are we going to find this electricity? That's the challenge as well. I wanted to give some food for thought today. So electricity to run the EAF, fine. But after to have enough electricity to make green hydrogen, it can be maybe in some new countries where electricity price is competitive. So for Total Energy, our solutions, for us, which is crystal clear, we want to be one of the top guys to produce electricity, because the world is going to electrify, and what Jose yesterday, my friend, said, the world is going to electrify. Say 3 times electricity, 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 which is true. Our target is to have 100 gigawatt by 2030. 100 gigawatt by 2030, meaning 100 billion euro investment. 100 billion euro investment. So this is the price of the transition. This is a price that, thanks to the good results we are doing, we can invest and grow. So by 2025, we would like to have 35 gigawatts, mix, as you can see, offshore, onshore, etc. So this is big target for Total Energy and big commitment. We will deliver that. So what does it mean for the steel industry, for our customers? It's a new era, because when we meet customers, they used to buy coal. Now they are going to try to discuss signing long-term contract of electricity, which is new for the steel industry. Very new, not so easy, and we understand that. But we would like to do that in order to secure this type of price, the volatility, etc. And we have solutions. So we have a big pipeline of projects across the globe. We have big pipeline of offshore wind asset, onshore solar farm to help you. And we have also battery storage, because as Rizwan mentioned before, renewables, the challenge is we have no wind, it's the night. Okay guys, you produce 24/7, so you need to store your energy. So we are developing some energy storage, battery storage, to support, to find solution for you. We can do now in Europe 50, 60 megawatts batteries in some big containers. And last but not least, we are also developing for your auto consumption, behind the meter, rooftop, solar PV, carports, etc. So we have some solution in order for you to support this electrification and this new path. So this is what I wanted to share today, and I will give the floor to Christian to present new also molecules. Thanks.
So I guess you understood that electricity is going to be cornerstone to the transition of most of the energy-intensive industries, but we've understood also that electrification is not going to be possible in all geographies. It can be restricted in terms of economics, in terms of availability, in terms of technology. And so we will need complementary solutions in order to reach net zero by 2050. And those are the solutions, the complementary solutions that I want to review with you now. Starting with, I can find the button, yes. Starting with biogas. We strongly believe in biogas, and we want to develop a global presence, reaching by 2030 the production of 20 terawatt-hour per year. You may think that it's a small number compared to your needs, and it's true. And the reason is that production is restricted by the availability of feedstock. We are going to produce biogas using waste, municipal solid waste, agriculture waste. And waste does not move across long distances, so it's quite difficult to massify on one location a big amount of feedstock to produce a world-scale plant. So we've recently started up a new plant in France, which is really world-scale, and it will produce a nameplate capacity a bit less than 200 gigawatt-hours per year. So it is restricted, but we believe in biogas because it allows a seamless transition from natural gas. Once it's purified into biomethane, it's basically the exact same molecule, the exact same specification, and it does not imply any change in the process. The second reason also is that it allows you to abate your exposure to ETS, and it's readily available. We produce biogas now. We are number one in France, we are number one in Poland, and we want to develop in Germany and in Spain. This is at the boundaries of the EU. But we also want to develop in South America, in Brazil, more specifically, and in the US. In the EU, it's very much supported by the public authorities in the frame of the Repower EU program, which sets a target of production of above 300 terawatt-hour on an annual basis. In terms of reporting, at the level of the GHG protocol, this is still under debate, so we hear that it's going in the right direction, but whereas you can abate your ETS exposure for the reporting, some discussions are still going on. For bigger quantities, we've discussed a lot yesterday already about hydrogen, about how it can be a solution to abate CO2. And TotalEnergies is going to become a player producing low-carbon hydrogen in Europe. And the main reason is that we needed to decarbonize our own operations as a big refiner in Europe. And we will be able to supply third-party off-takers from our operations. But most of the third-party supplies will come from overseas in projects that we are currently developing in India, in the US, obviously, in Australia, in South America, which is mainly going to be Brazil with our partner Casa dos Ventos, in Africa. And all those geographies have been selected because we believe we can produce large amounts of green electricity at lower cost in order to supply customers, third-party off-takers in Europe, under better conditions. However, low-carbon hydrogen will remain an expensive energy, and it will never be at par, even in the long run, with natural gas. So this is something we certainly need to keep in mind. Last, but certainly not least, you've seen in the introduction slide that Cyril used that our energy mix is going to strongly transition from oil and gas, but we will remain even in 2050, we will keep a certain amount of fossil fuel, including some natural gas, but we want to be net zero, and the society wants to be net zero. It means that we will need offsetting technologies. And we strongly believe that carbon capture and storage is a technology which will help the world to become net zero, because, as we've said, not every process can be electrified. We have an ambition to develop 10 million tons of storage capacity on an annual basis by 2030, and quite a large range between 50 to 100 million tons globally by 2050. We have a head start in Europe, and you see it on the map. We have quite an extensive portfolio of projects to develop storage capacities. I mentioned projects, but some of them have quite a high maturity since they have commercial operations set in 2025, which is the case of Northern Lights off the coast of Norway. Right after Aramis in 2026 off the coast of the Netherlands. We are developing Bifrost, which will become operational a bit later by 2030. And we've recently been awarded a new license to develop capacities adjacent to Northern Lights in order to expand the capacity there. So head start in Europe, but we are strongly developing in the US, which will mainly be located in the Gulf Coast, in the Middle East, and in Asia. You see that we mainly focus on the development of capacities. This is where an oil and gas company has expertise, has skills, but the full value chain needs to be developed. And we are not going to develop the midstream all by ourselves. So this is why on the slide I mentioned that this will have to be co-developed, meaning the transportation of the CO2 from the plant of emission through to the hub, which will aggregate the CO2 at the port before exporting the CO2 to the storage capacity. And this is really something that the emitter needs to be involved as soon as possible in order to be in operations by 2030. And I would like to conclude this presentation by somehow comparing the exposure of the steel industry in terms of the need of the solutions we've been discussing today with regards to the other usual suspects that belong to the so-called hard-to-abate sectors, namely aluminum, cement, and chemicals. The figures are an estimate by 2050 of the needs at the boundaries of the EU. It's quite difficult to have credible figures if we do that globally. And you see that the volumes are quite massive. And it's important to keep in mind that steel is not alone in this world, and everybody is looking for those solutions at the same time. The column related to green electricity does not take into account the green electricity which will be required to produce the hydrogen that will be needed in the second column. Even though the EU has the ambition to import more or less 50% of the needs, the other 50% will have to be domestically produced. And roughly, if you want to produce 3 million tons of hydrogen, which will be dedicated to steel, you will need an additional 180 terawatt-hour of green electricity per year. So we are really talking about big amounts. Cyril has mentioned that we are developing offshore wind. We recently have been awarded a license to develop 3 gigawatts offshore in Germany. That was mid-July this year. And the first electrons, according to plan, according to the project Gantt diagram, is going to be supplied by 2030. So you see that those projects are ongoing, but they take time before they will deliver. And the same comment applies for the last column, which takes into account the needs for CCS in order to be net zero by the end of the period, which is 2050. Remember the figure, our ambition, quite a wide range, between 50 to 100 million tons, but this is a global figure. The needs here are at the boundaries of the EU. We are not the only player around the block, but there are not many players which have the skills and which are credible to develop storage capacities offshore, which means that capacity is going to build up, but most probably the ramp-up will be outpaced by demand. And so in order to be operational by 2030, which most of you guys have set as a target, we certainly need to start discussing quickly in order to be ready. I thank you for your attention, and hopefully we will start a nice discussion after the panel.
So now we are at a point that everybody has highlighted since yesterday and today. So my next guest is Bruno Gerritz. Bruno, you have got a captive audience because everybody has talked about carbon capture and storage. Bruno is the Client Engagement Manager at the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute. So, Bruno, we have talked quite since yesterday and today. So we would really like to hear where the carbon capture and storage can really help us, because we are talking about terawatt hours and then over 180 terawatt hours, and even that is just an estimate. So there will be a shortfall. So please don't disappoint us. Tell us some good news.
Sure, all under control. Good morning, everybody. Which button is it?
The green one.
The big one. Yeah, the big one. That
this
one.
one, yes.
Oh, okay, right, great. Oh, okay, you managed that. Good. Well, thank you, worldsteel, for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here in my hometown, actually. Hope you're all sampling the delights of Antwerp. I'll give you 2 words about who we are so you have an idea of why I say the things I say and what the angle is that we're coming at. The Global CCS Institute is an independent climate change think tank, not-for-profit, member-based. We're not an industry association, we're a think tank. And we've got over 200 members, actually, I should update this, across governments, global corporations, small ventures, and research. Our mission is to accelerate the deployment of CCS as part of all the solutions there's out there. And how do we do that? We build community, we build knowledge, and we build support. So with that, why CCS? Don't think I need to expand too much on that. It's one of the tools alongside others. And most of the people here will probably fit in this first, find reason in this first line there, achieving deep decarbonization in hard to abate industry. But there's a number of other reasons, and I keep, you'll hear me say this, saying it's a puzzle. People use CCS for different reasons. CCS is quite versatile. So some other reasons there. Now, what does the CCS market look like? What has it been doing over the last number of years? This is a graph. What you're looking at here is the number of commercial scale CCS projects in the world, and in red at the bottom is the operational ones, and you've got a thin sliver of projects under construction and then various stages of development. As you see, from 2010 it went down frighteningly, and then it started picking up again. And even this is last updated, this slide, in September 22, just prior to the release of our global annual status of CCS report. So the next one is coming out in 2 months. But even if you discount that last bar, on the slide, you see there was a bit of a valley of death, as we used to call it. Luckily, we seem to be climbing out of that, and as you see, I've updated in clumsily there in red numbers the figures from last year. We're growing. We've got 37 current projects in operation. So the next slide, the next bar, sorry, on that graph for this year will be even bigger. So that valley of death is soon going to be a blip in a growth curve. I mentioned that CCS is quite versatile, and this sort of demonstrates that. Now, there's 3 elements I want to point at here. One is, at the bottom, you see the timeline. You see the very first project started in 1972. We sometimes hear it still mentioned that CCS is a promising technology. Well, no, it's tried and tested. We've been doing this for 50 years. There's not been leaks, there's not been disasters. This is tried and tested. Technologically, we can do it, and it is being done. The bubbles represent individual projects and the size of these projects, of how much carbon they actually capture and sequester. Then on the y-axis, you see the various industries where CCS is being applied. And not surprisingly, at the bottom, in red, you've got the operational projects, and those tend to be the low-hanging fruit in gas and in ethanol and fertilizer, where you got virtually pure CO2 coming out as a byproduct. And then further up, higher up, yes, you've got cement and steel, and indeed, there's one operational facility there in Abu Dhabi, which you probably know more of than I do, but I'll show you a slide anyway. Last point on this bubble chart is the size of the bubbles. I don't know if you can make it out, but the biggest bubbles are about 5 million tons of CCS per year. The Port of Antwerp is preparing a project, Antwerp at Sea, which is anticipating to capture 8 to 9 million tons, that is, per year. Belgium as a whole has got 100 million tons, and that's a tiny country, and then Germany's 800 million tons. So not saying CCS is going to solve all of that. Sorry, Rizwan. But there's a way to go. And how far we've got to go, we can see here. Global emissions are currently about 40 gigatons. Various institutional and research bodies brandish different figures, but if you take a rough average there of 14%, we would need about 5,000 or over 5,000 million tons per annum of CCS. The single lonely grey dot is where we stand today. Despite that uptake in the growth curve, 50 million tons. So this industry is going to have to grow a lot by 2050 if we want to meet our climate targets. 100-fold is the figure. Now, I don't know many industries who've done that in that time span, but even if it's half of that, this is going to be one hell of a ride. So how are we going to do that? The difficulty is that the cost of CCS is a big red number on the bottom line. And what stands against that is some direct contributors, a carbon price, which is not revenue, it's an avoided cost, funding and carbon credits and potential utilization revenues. And then you've got indirect contributors, which are harder to quantify. To what extent does you meeting your sustainability targets give you access to better lending rates? to what extent does your reputation help you attract more staff? It's going to help, but how do you relate that back to the cost of CCS to justify these investments? Quick tour around the world of projects and policies, and I've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to have to take shortcuts, so I apologize for the toes I'm about to step on. The current operational projects, again, this is a slide that needs to be updated, but in red you see a dominance in North America and a smattering of operational projects around the world. If you then look at the pipeline, which is promising, you see 3 big clusters. Yes, North America a lot, but significant cluster in Europe and also in the whole of Southeast Asia. So that is promising because it indicates the range of countries where CCS is being applied is growing. And these are some of the operational projects that went live since last year. In 22 and 23, we've got ethanol and gas, CCGT in North America, Orca in Iceland, direct air capture. It is operational, it is commercial. And then China has got two live projects as well, one on a refinery and one is coal to syngas. So demonstrating versatility and geographic spread. Directly for CCS on steel, well, we've got one operational project already, and you'll know this one, the Al Rayada project, which is sequestering about 800,000 to 900,000 tons a year these days, or has been. And then there's 2 interesting pilot projects that I'm aware of. One right here in Belgium, ArcelorMittal has it. We visited it in June with our members. Very interesting visit and very warm welcome from ArcelorMittal. I can recommend it. They're applying the CO2, they're converting it into bioethanol. So they're making some money out of it. Now, to what extent that is achievable for the full scale of emissions, and that remains to be seen. And then I recently heard about another pilot, which is in Austria, voestalpine, which where Andritz is running a pilot carbon capture plant. So what's needed next? How are we going to achieve that growth? Well, I mentioned the business case, the funding. Infrastructure is the other big one, and then we're not just talking about building it, we're talking about the funding, who's going to pay for that, and the regulation around it, open access, fair pricing, etc. And then there's a whole list of policy where I see a lot of work that can be done that doesn't necessarily need to cost a lot of money to governments. But creating a market is something that will need to be helped. Access to UK storage reservoirs, like Total will appreciate for EU emitters, would help the market. It opens up the market possibilities, it lowers the prices to some extent, but it certainly creates additional opportunities. Bilateral agreements, which I've got a slide on at the far end, are things that don't cost much, but are necessary boxes that need to be ticked. Infrastructure-wise, there is a lot happening and you'll forgive my Europe bias, where I'm based here, so I know more about that, but we're seeing receiving facilities, as they call it, receiving facilities. I see them as temporary onshore buffering capacity, so between capture and storage, you'll need that buffering capacity. Pipelines being developed, Aramis was mentioned, there's a pipeline planned between Rotterdam and Germany. Here in Belgium, Fluxys is working on an onshore network, and then another pipeline from Bruges to Norway. So there's a lot of pipelines. Ships are being commissioned as we speak. Some of our members are mentioned here, and they're all working on shipping solutions. And storage licensing is crucial as well. Now the UK is storming ahead when it comes to licensing. 24, if I can't write to, and that number is up to date. 24 licenses have been issued already. Now that's not the same thing as a fully functioning storage site. There's still a lot of work left between that. But yeah, storage licensing is a crucial part of infrastructure. Norway has just issued more licenses as well. Denmark and Italy are progressing. Greece, so we're progressing there. In terms of policy, I've got one slide here on North America, and you see in red, you see the states which are red hot when it comes to CCS. In Canada, Alberta and Saskatchewan, and then down in America, in the USA, you've got California, Texas, Louisiana. In yellow, the states that are heating up. And why are they all heating up or red hot? It's because of policy. Can't go into much detail, certainly not at state level, but the Inflation Reduction Act is the one that's best known, 45Q as it's called. Now that's interesting for two reasons, not just the funding and not just the money aspect. Yes, it's promising a lot of money to companies applying CCS, and interestingly, it is done in a very different way than Europe does. In Europe, we're applying it on a competition basis. In America, it's like, these are the rules of engagement. If you're eligible, bam, here's your money. So that sort of programmatic support is very helpful, and we've seen a very big uptick. You saw the slide on projects in the pipeline in North America, a big cluster there. There's a significant impact there from this 45Q already. The other reason, other than purely the money, why 45Q is really helpful is because it improves the parameters around making CCS possible. I'm thinking of smaller projects are now possible, are now eligible. Later construction date is possible. Things like that. There are parameters, and that don't necessarily cost money. So going back to that theme of policy. Now the final point, and I want to mention Canada in that respect, both the US and Canada offer their funding in terms of what's called tax credits. Credits against the tax that you owe on the income you've earned. And interestingly, to me, that's like America at its finest. You can, if you don't make the income, and therefore you don't have the tax, you can sell your tax credit to somebody else. Brilliant. Canada has tuned that up a notch even further, in that they've skewed their tax credits to be phasing down after 2030, thus incentivizing early investment rather than late investment. Again, not expensive policy, but clever. As for Europe, I've mentioned a number of items already, the storage permits, the facilities in progress. We have seen this year 2 transnational pilot projects. CO2 has been shipped, or first trucked and then shipped from Switzerland all the way to Iceland, and then also from Belgium, from Antwerp to Denmark. That's significant. That goes back to those bilateral agreements that I mentioned. These need to be in place for something called the London Protocol to be overcome. Boxes are being ticked, so promising. The Innovation Fund has again awarded a number of CCS projects this year and more coming, and individual member states such as the Netherlands and especially Denmark has come storming out of nowhere in the last 2 years, are adding individual member state policies. And Greece, I want to mention in that respect as well, seems to me to be the Denmark of the Mediterranean. They're really coming up strongest. Innovation Fund winners there. There is a lot of shipping, obviously, and a lot of engagement. And so in the Netherlands, Aramis, we've mentioned, there is local policy and subsidies called SDE++. And Porthos, whilst I do mention at the bottom as a warning in a sense that, okay, it didn't go smoothly, but Porthos in Rotterdam has been approved. There was a court case running against it, and that was from an environmental NGO wanting to stop CCS and using different regulation, but they overcame that. Now, Rizwan, I noticed that that's not my time anymore. That's the clock. So I don't know how much time I've got left. Great. Skipping ahead to the Middle East, we've got 3 projects in operation there right now. One Al Riyadh, and then we've got in Qatar in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as well, with more projects they're underway. As you see at the bottom, 9 million tons in 27 expected to be up and running. ADNOC has literally last week announced a financial investment decision for 1.5 million tons, which is part of the 5 that they're expecting by 2030. So that's one of the first FIDs that I've heard for a while. Even Porthos were only expecting end of this year. And I have to speed through this. I'm not going to do it justice, but China, enormous potential, and the picture you're seeing there is from one of their projects, one of the ones that I showed, where they're applying coal to syngas and capturing that CO2 and trucking it currently out whilst awaiting the pipeline that's being built to a nearby oil field where they will be applying enhanced oil recovery. Japan and Singapore are similar in the sense that they've got a lot of industry, a lot of emissions, but they've got nowhere to put their CO2. So they're looking for strong links with countries nearby, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Australia, which have got, of course, which do have the storage capacity and looking at this as an opportunity to grow their economy as well. So that's all very positive. That's the bilateral agreement slide. I should have put it a bit earlier, but the point is, as you can see, there's a lot of discussions happening, but there's a lot still missing as well. These indicate that countries are talking to each other, they are progressing policy discussions between them and ticking those boxes little by little, one by one. This is another one where the European Union can step in and try to streamline this or model it, template it to some extent to make this all go smoother and faster. So in summary, we do have promising policy and progress, project progress, but we'll still need to increase the whole industry 100-fold. And how are we going to achieve that? With infrastructure, with more support and funding, and by making the business case add up. So hope that clarifies some of the elements, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruno. I do apologize that we are running a bit short on time. I would just pose a question there. Am I allowed to eat into 5 minutes of your coffee time? You have the permission. Thank you very much. I would try to keep the discussion a bit brief. So my first question is to you, Bruno. You have made your case. It's convincing. It can be done. But it looks like when you showed that polka dots, and there was only one dot which was colored there. So there is quite a long way to go there. It looks like CCS is being treated as like a lady in waiting or a prince 10th in the succession line. If we are all talking about scenarios there, we don't know what is going to happen in 40 years or 30 years. So if the time comes, if the cold reality hits that we are far behind the targets, I think there will be quite a lot of expectation at that time on carbon capture and storage. So it might be that the situation comes, there is a big rush on carbon capture and storage because that is the only way which can really deliver deep carbonization. If that comes, is the world ready to deliver so many of those projects that will be required in a given hypothetical scenario?
Well, as I mentioned, technologically it's possible, it's being done. And the reason it has been done, or it has been able to be done, most of the projects to date have been in North America, the operational ones, and that's thanks to the money that they generated, because a lot of them are subsidized or made financially possible through enhanced oil recovery. We do see the number of enhanced oil recoveries projects reduce as a total percentage of projects, but we need the business case. If, as you say, under the scenario that you paint, if it really gets urgent, we'll need additional funding. Fine. I trust if the proverbial hits the fan, then that funding will be available. The other element to that is infrastructure and policy. Policy, again, a lot of things can be done quite quickly. I do see a role for some sort of a CCS coordination at a EU level, which leaves infrastructure. And whilst the agreement to build it is one thing, building a pipeline will take whatever time it takes. So that's potentially a bottleneck.
Thanks. Important point.
Yes. I can add one thing. I think for CCS, CO2 is a strange animal. So this is also, everybody say, okay, CCS will do that, will inject, blah, blah, but it's challenging. As Total Energy, we are our technical experts within OneTech are working on the evolution on the CO2. It will be also which type of CO2 the steel industry is going to deliver, because in each sequestration plant we will have in Europe, we'll maybe have, like in Aramis, Northern Line, specific CO2 requirements. So this is something which the industry also is not ready to address. So there's a lot of work to be done. So it will take also a lot of time to be ready. That's why we need, yes, 7, 8, 10 years to be more mature. And it's not, I would say CO2 is not so easy to address. And we need to pay attention, and we have a lot of homework to be done.
No, that's a fair point there. It's because not everybody is going to have their own CCS only for their own sector or for their own industry. Those pipelines, they will be shared by several industries. So it means that, yeah, there needs to be a dialogue between all those sectors. Some of them might have quite lean CO2. Some of them might have got quite a concentrated source. So it makes a perfect sense that we work with the other industries as well, not only among ourselves. That's a good point there, Bruno. The bottleneck might be the pipelines, and then the right geographies that we might have already the identification of, that these are the prime sources where we could store. So if we have got these two in hand, hopefully, that might be the solution there. Another point that I wish somebody would have highlighted, but nobody did. We talked about quite a large amount of energy there. The society at large is very power hungry. I just made a back of the envelope calculation. Roughly 158 exajoules of energy is used by the society. That includes electricity and everything else. So exa means that, yeah, there are 18 zeros with that. So 250 exajoules is required and used by the society, and the steel industry uses 40 exajoules. Well, this is roughly 6.8%, and that also corresponds to our energy requirements, our emissions as well. So the other bottleneck in terms of provision of that electricity. Now, even if the electricity is available there, we should not forget the other component I was alluding to in the beginning, the storage. Because we are working with the intermittent nature of those renewable energies, so we talk about something which will be at the junction of the energy sector and the steel industry, which is the electrolyzer. Who owns the electrolyzer? Does it belong to the steel industry or the site, or do we get the hydrogen from the power sector or somebody else? And we don't need to worry about that. We sign a contract, and they are responsible for continuous supply of hydrogen there. But we do not have an answer yet on the electrolyzer even, because there are two types which are prevalent. One of them is the PEM technology. The other one is the alkaline type. and they have got their ups and downs and their pros and cons. The alkaline type is quite easy to run if you have got a steady load. There are no fluctuations, so you can run it quite easily, but it has a response time of over 50 minutes. So it means that, yeah, if there are fluctuations, sun is not shining, the wind is not blowing, starting, stopping is a big challenge there. So it means this is one of the secrets for the first movers, because they are sitting in a situation where they are situated in a region where they have a continuous supply. They can get away by using this type. The PEM, for example, has got a response time of only 5 minutes. So that is a prime technology to work with the intermittent nature of the renewable energy that we are talking about there. Are we moving fast in that? How quickly we can be ready with the PEM technology? Because the size is the constraint there. We cannot build them large enough yet.
I will take it first to start. I think there are two answers to this point. First of all, as we present in our slide, in Total Energy, we have Saft, which was one of the leaders in batteries we purchased some years ago. And today in Europe, we are developing energy storage to avoid this intermittency. It's a cost, it's true, and the technology is developing. So it can be for some steel producer interesting to have this battery storage in their premises. This is one solution. We can investigate and check tailor-made solution. The second solution will be, in terms to avoid this electricity issue, is to bring value to our customer, meaning, okay, you are signing some contract with an offshore wind asset. But as you say, no wind, so how to do it? Within Total Energy, we have also some integrated power division who is working to say, okay, we will provide you the base load. You are shaping your offshore wind asset, and we will do an extra layer. We will do our job within our internal experts to say, okay, you will have a base load, and you don't bother about this intermittency. So this is also what Total Energy is developing today and tomorrow within our team to provide this solution to you. Because for you, the plant is running 24/7. You don't think, okay, I need to produce my steel. And this is what I think also the energy company like Total Energy can provide as a solution to load the plant and also for the electrolyzers.
I have a feeling you're not telling me something here. Because you say that, yeah, you can provide the base load, but you have not told me how. And it is certainly not only the battery, there is something else there.
No, I can. In fact, within Total Energy, we have a trading desk, and some big players in the room are also some experts to do that. So in fact, our trader, what they are doing is they take the profile of solar PV or an offshore wind, and we complete with other assets. We do some, in fact, consolidation to have a nice portfolio. This is what we are doing. It's another world. It's really what electricity is. It's also a new world for us. So we are discovering. But it can be a solution for the steel industry as well.
Thank you. So if we are not really short on time, Valentin, I will ask you a very provocative question, because I think you like a bit of controversy, because you have challenged quite a bit of those established myths and received wisdom. So do you think that, yeah, we are on track? Are we able to handle some of those bottlenecks that we have spotted so far?
Yeah, thanks. I don't see the controversy, but I think we're very much not on track. No, I think we're very much not on track. So on hydrogen, I think banking on electrolyzer learning rates and electrolyzer following similar cost improvements as renewable energy is probably very optimistic. But I think there will be some of this. But I mean, going back to what you introduced with and what you just said, this will be a very different energy system. And I sometimes get the feeling, also yesterday, that the steel industry is trying to solve this alone, whereas you you are and you will be very dependent on the energy system you operate in. So the whole discussion around base load, around nuclear or continuing with fossil fuels, is how the energy system has been operating. There's different ideas. Again, it's a bit of a gamble what to go for. But I feel like companies as Total and a lot of startups as well, they see a different energy system around electricity emerging that works quite differently. And I think the steel industry will have to learn how to deal with that, have to reinvent itself. And it's not necessarily the big incumbents that have it the easiest to adapt to this. So if you're a startup and you do green iron production in France or Australia, you probably have, and you have a small plant, say 2 million tons, that's easier than if you're a large steelmaker with 50 million tons capacity and you need to secure, or need to meet your climate targets. So I think in terms of hydrogen, I mean, definitely not the volumes. If my calculation is right, then your 2050 hydrogen capacity or renewables capacity can supply maybe 50 million tons of steel, like Germany and France maybe. So that's 2% of global production for a giant company as Total. So that's going to be a lot of energy, I mean, very crudely. I think on CCS, we're also very much not on track. So we have 3 projects. One is benefiting from a technology that already produces pure CO2. So in the Emirates Steel case, they don't really need to capture the CO2 because it already leaves the process as pure form. That, I mean, Tenova has a very good technology, right? It's still the only, I mean, basically we should connect all these plants that Tenova has to CCS already because they're ready. I mean, they've been around for a while. But also, it's used for enhanced oil recovery, which won't be, I mean, going to 2050, this will be very difficult to sell, I think. The other 2 projects, the Belgian project somehow produces bioethanol from fossil carbon, which I don't know they do. I'm very suspicious of it. But it's also probably making, in a life cycle perspective, making a very small dent in emissions. The Austrian project also has difficulties because maybe some of you will know, carbon capture and storage is not legal in Austria. So it requires quite drastic policy changes there. So I think, I mean, we saw the CCS pipeline and there's a bunch of projects, they're just not in steel. And it goes back to my point on CCS in coal versus gas. So gas-based steelmaking, I expect there will be many projects once companies move into gas-based steelmaking, but today they're located in countries that are not yet interested in CCS or don't have the incentive. If Europe moves to gas, there will be a lot of CCS projects, I think.
Thanks, Valentin. I think we can close the session on this thought. Let's not try to do everything on our own. The challenge is great, but it can be only realized, we can meet it, if we work outside the industry as well with the right partners there. So thank you very much for your attention there. Thank you to my colleagues.